First, I want to say I'm really happy to be here presenting some of different, like some data on different type of perspective taking, or at least different levels, I would say. And I would take the stand of looking at it as more as an embodied process, but we can argue whether it is or not. Here's a bit of the outline for my talk today. So looking at something we haven't talked today is about maybe an interaction between interoception and perspective taking. First with a review and then with a study where we tried to look at this interaction. And then the last study would be to look at emotional egocentricity biases as a form of affective perspective. So we are, I think, all agreeing that to take, when we consider perspective taking, we first need to consider the self and the external world, and then eventually the other, that can be either an object or a person. And when we consider the self, there is a lot of information, and some that might be neglected is also the internal sensory signals that we receive or that we perceive. So two key concepts that would be important for my talk would be that on one hand, obviously, perspective taking, and on the other hand, is kind of interoception in comparison to exteroception. For perspective taking, we have seen also different definitions and different levels. The one I took now is kind of trying to disentangle between these three levels, or at least kind of the most. The spatial, visual, spatial, the cognitive, and the affective, and the studies and show you it's really focusing on spatial, visual, spatial, or visual, spatial, and the affective levels. In terms of interoception, it can really go from the signals to something more metacognitive, or like your ability to think about your belief and your own abilities. But the one, let's say, the levels that we considered in our study is really not necessarily about the signals we receive, but our perception of the signals at three different levels. The first level being in terms of interoceptive accuracy. So how accurate you are in perceiving your internal signals. The interoceptive sensibility, so how sensitive you are about your signals. And then finally, the interoceptive awareness, so how aware you are about your ability. And to measure these different levels, we use or at least we can use the heartbeat detection task. That is arguably, we can really think it's not a good task, but we try to do our best in controlling the different compounds. To measure the interoceptive sensibility, there is different questionnaires, such as the Maya task. And finally, for the interoceptive awareness, we can do a correlation between this interoceptive accuracy and your confidence about your belief about your performance. Okay, so we are on the same level. We have all these concepts in mind. And what we tried first is look at all the literatures we could find in and trying to see whether perceiving internal sensation may affect our ability to take another point of view at all these three different levels, so affective, cognitive, and spatial visual. And we wanted to also really consider interoception as these three levels of accuracy, sensibility, and sensitivity, thinking that it might play different roles depending on which type of perspective taking we are talking about, and depending maybe on the task as well. We thought we would find quite a few studies, but actually there were not that many, or at least there were never a consensus on no studies were really looking at these three levels together, nor in terms of at the interoception, almost none, and then also looking at the three different levels of perspective taking. The main results we found that was also replicated in different studies was the fact that there is a positive correlation or relationship between interoceptive accuracy and the affective perspective taking, so how you can perceive someone else's emotions. The other relations, there are some studies, including one by Charleston, but it might be, like, yeah, we can discuss it, is really maybe a positive correlation with level 2, no, it's not level 1 of visual perspective taking, and maybe some cognitive perspective. However, all the other link were really not studied, so there is quite a lot that needs to be still investigated. But what we can conclude from this is that it seems that interoception may be relevant for some aspect of perspective taking. For now, it seems to be really related to affective levels. And we are hypothesizing that maybe it could be related to something related to affective levels, our ability to empathize with others, and maybe if there is a relationship with the level 2 of perspective visual spatial, it might be more kind of an embodied process. So if the body is involved, maybe then your ability of perceiving internal signals might influence the way your ability in taking different perspectives. So that said, we tried to look at whether maybe interoception might have an impact on spatial perspective taking. Taking what we could take, say, bodily visual, not visual, tactile spatial perspective taking, the task that Malika just presented to you. So that graphesthesia task, thinking that really touch could be considered also kind of in between. It's really at the boundaries between the external and internal world. So if there is something that can be captured for spatial perspective taking, maybe this is a good option. So our aim was to investigate the links between spatial perspective taking and interoceptive abilities, and thinking whether internal signals perception could impact the perspective naturally taken, but also our ability to switch between different perspectives. And here is the design. So our first participant did some measures, so did different tasks to measure the interoception at the 3 different levels using the heartbeat detection task, then the time estimation task to control controversible counting task, and the Maya to measure the interoceptive awareness. Then they did one block of natural spatial perspective taking with the graphesthesia task to have the 3 perspectives of our participants. And then in another block, they were imposed to switch between different, so either an ego-centered or a decentered perspective. We didn't really care in that case which one they took freely before, but we really were interested in the ability to switch between ego and decentered. This kind of repeat switch design. We replicated the studies Malika showed in terms of like percentage of ego trying decentered and ego head that participants take freely. And in this kind of new rep switch design, we also found that participants are more in average more accurate for ego-centered perspective and faster. And also we find kind of this switching effect especially in accuracy. Obviously, what we are interested in is more the relationship with interception. And so first, at the, whether it's related to the perspective participant freely adopt. And here we found only one correlations with interoceptive awareness. So here, the higher interoceptive awareness was predicting higher accuracy in decentered perspective. So it seems that the more individuals are aware of the internal signals, and in that case, just cardiac, obviously, the more likely they are able to spontaneously adopt a decentered perspective. So it seems that interoceptive awareness could be linked to a better ability in decentering. Then when we look at results for the second part, when participants are asked to switch between decentered and egocentered perspective or repeat, what we find is two correlations with in that time interoceptive accuracy. So on the left, you can see that in post-switching session, so when they have to switch from decentered to ego-centered perspective. So that when they have to come back to their own ego-centered perspective, then higher interoceptive accuracy would predict a lower accuracy in that type of trials. And actually, we find the same pattern of results in reaction time. So not only in accuracy, but it seems that higher interoceptive accuracy would predict slower reaction time when going back to ego-centered perspective. So it seems that participants with higher interoceptive accuracy experience more difficulty in switching back to their own perspective. That at first we were kind of surprised, but in a way it could make sense that if you are really aware of your signals and you are already in a decentered one, it might kind of almost inhibit your own the ego-centered and make it more difficult to come back to. But yeah, it's a first study. There is obviously lots that we can improve, but I think it's the first nice step in looking at really this interaction between perception of internal signals and perspective taking. And next, I wanted to show you some results on emotional egocentricity bias. And here, I would consider that it's a kind of affective perspective taking, or at least kind of looking again about this congruency, consistent, inconsistent point of view. And if we think that human tends to use a self-reference point to perceive the world, then it seems obvious. I mean, to all of you, I think it would be evident that if we have the same mental state or emotional or affective states, then it will be easy to put yourself in the other person's affective states and to make the judgment. However, obviously, so it will be based on shared affective representation. However, if the other person is in the opposite affective states, then you will have to kind of inhibit your own affective state in order to judge adequately what the other is experiencing, but also to then act adequately towards the other person. So it's really a balance between shared affective representation and kind of this self-other distinction. There has been different paradigms that has been used to study this emotional egocentricity task, from monetary reward, punishment paradigm to tactile paradigm. And overall, it has shown that there is a tendency to have, or I mean, no, there is no tendency, there is a positive egocentric bias. So people tend to use their own affective state to judge other people's states. And in my knowledge, all these paradigms really are based on congruency. And actually, most of the paradigms used in perspective taking is really comparing congruency and incongruency. And in that case, also for emotional egocentricity, most of the paradigm used this kind of real virtual representation of the others. Even if sometimes the person was in the room, actually we were not seeing the other experiences. For example, we were seeing an image of what the other is. So in this study, we wanted to explore how our judgment of affective perspective taking or emotional egocentricity is influenced by what we see or feel on the others, but also interpersonal relationships. As we have seen, context and so on in group out-group is very having an effect on our biases. So we wanted to develop a more kind of bodily task where we see the others, but also taking into account baseline, so sensory bias, and also look at an interpersonal relationship. And we used a mother-child diet to test this design. So here is a design. So first participant were ratings how pleasant are different objects. So for example, cotton and scarf, either just by feeling it or judging how pleasant it is on the other when they were seeing it on the other. So that's kind of our prior sensory estimate. And then they did kind of almost a classical task. However, I want to note, because I think it can be for discussion, that here people didn't know in advance which if they had to judge how pleasant it is for the self or how pleasant it is for the others. So they had kind of to keep in mind what they experience, but also what the other experience. And what is important to note is that people could see what the other is experiencing, but could not see what they were experiencing. So they kind of had a unisensory experience of each, the self and the other. And we could compute two biases, so the classical emotional egocentric bias based on congruency. But we can also look at kind of prior-based biases, so looking at incongruent trials in comparison to unisensory trials. And here are our results. So we kind of replicate the classical congruency-based biases with positive egocentric biases in adults, and with, in average, no alter-centric biases. But you can see that there is a lot of inter-individual differences. And when we look at our kind of prior-based emotional biases, here we have a similar pattern, but it seems that we have kind of this negative alter-centric biases, which goes in hand with the positive egocentric biases. So basically, you are biased by what you are experiencing. Yes. That's what I said. And then we did the same paradigm, but in diets of mother children that was either paired with their own child or with someone else's child. And we wondered whether it would influence their egocentric biases. And here are the results. So again, congruency-based emotional biases versus prior sensory-based emotional biases. And what you can see, so in blue is results for the mothers that were paired with their own child, and in red with someone else's child. And for alter-centric biases, you don't have any difference between groups, and overall, no alter-centric biases. However, so for the egocentric bias, it seems that mothers that have been paired with their own child have a higher egocentric bias. We could expect the other way around. They are more empathic towards your own child, but it seems that actually you tend to project even more your own feelings. I mean, in average, you can see again a lot of variability into your own child in contrary to someone else's job. So overall, what are the take-home messages of these studies? At the first studies I have showed you, it seems that interoceptive abilities are linked to affective abilities in perspective taking. In embodied task, it seems that interoceptive accuracy, as measured by the heartbeat counting task, is linked to a better ability in decentering and more difficulty in taking back an ego-centered perspective. But we really need a more systemic studies on these different levels of interoception, but also of. And for the last part, we have showed you a kind of a new design trying to look at more differently at egocentric and agnocentric biases, and also an example of the importance of relationships and context on. I would like to thank my collaborator, Malika, and also Katrina too. And thank you.
Next question about the paradigm at the end. So
yeah,
so my understanding of the standard touch paradigms, you do get smaller but some outer-centric bias, and you don't. Do you have a sense of why that's different?
You mean depending on whether we take prior or congruency, or
yeah, the congruency effect. So my understanding, the classic Celani one, you do get a small outer-centric thing, and to be honest, kind of selfish reason for this, we'd much rather use yours, but we have two experimenters stroking people at the same time. I'd rather stop doing that. But do you have a sense of why you don't get that outer-centric?
Actually, so here I showed you a group where we don't have allocentric bias, and this one is in students, so it's quite young. Say. We did it in another sample with in a public event, so the variability was a bit higher than age, and in that sample, in average, we see a positive allocentric bias. And when we compare the age, we do see a difference actually between the groups. So, I mean, that's one difference between the two groups, and that actually Federica Riva and colleagues have shown that the age has an impact on these biases. So maybe that can be something, but yes. I maybe it's something, yes, that if you judge yourself, you can maybe discard more easily the other, and or at least you don't capture it in this kind of congruency, like when you compute these biases.
And yours doesn't have a picture of what the others.
No, you just see the other and you feel yourself.
In the age effect you just spoke about, is the age of the other also variable, or is the experimenter always the other? Is it the difference in age that's driving?
So actually here it's another participant. So it's always two, like
two students, but in your public.
And the public, we did do kind of a multi-level and control for age, and we saw a positive percentage. But it's a good point that we need to, I mean, we didn't really look whether the dyadic age had.
Yeah, I have a question to ask. It's so very interesting. But do I understand correctly? So there are two participants and one experimenter, and they can see this experimenter.
Yes.
Do you think it can also influence the experience, because it's kind of, there is a third person present and maybe it's interferes somehow with, because this other person is also feeling the same things they're both feeling, and maybe it can.
So we did it with we had a fox that was holding this the material, so they were not like the experimenter is not experiencing the materials.
Okay.
But yes, indeed, the participants do see the experiment. So it's in a social context, definitely. It might influence it.